The MP5 Gambit. The steel-grey concrete of Stalag Lufthansa 3's solitary confinement block echoes with Jake McNiece's measured breathing as he turns the small firing pin between calloused fingers. Outside his cramped cell, November 1943, wind cuts through the barbed wire perimeter like a blade, but inside, all Jake can focus on is this tiny piece of machined steel, a component he palmed from a confiscated Schmeisser during his brutal processing 6 weeks ago. The German MPs missed it during their search, and now this fragment of an enemy weapon represents something larger than escape. It's proof that even in captivity, a demolition expert never stops thinking like a saboteur. The irony still tastes bitter. Jake McNasty McNiece, the rebellious NCO who'd survived Normandy's hedgerows by blowing things up and breaking rules, sits locked away because of a reconnaissance mission he'd volunteered for out of pure boredom with garrison duty. His B-24 went down over occupied France in September, leaving him with cracked ribs, a concussion, and the dubious honor of being the only enlisted paratrooper among a barracks full of captured bomber crews who view his presence with suspicion and resentment. "American ingenuity," comes a voice through the food slot, accented but clear. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter peers through the narrow opening, studying Jake with curious intensity rather than hostility. The veteran Luftwaffe guard's mechanical engineering background shows in the way his eyes focus on the firing pin. Instead of confiscating it, Richter pauses. "You see components where others see only metal." Jake meets the German's gaze without flinching, his demolition-trained mind automatically cataloguing details. Richter's worn uniform, the careful way he handles his rifle, the absence of the casual cruelty Jake expected from his captors. What follows isn't friendship. The war's realities make that impossible. But something stranger, a professional respect between two men who understand the elegant mechanics of destruction. Through the cell's small window, Jake watches other prisoners in the compound, their faces gaunt but determined. Colonel Harrison, the senior Allied officer, made it clear during Jake's first interrogation that his reputation preceded him. The Germans know exactly who he is, and they're particularly interested in his demolition expertise and methods for improvising explosives from common materials. But watching Richter's methodical inspection rounds, Jake begins to understand that not all guards see him simply as intelligence to be extracted. The firing pin catches what little light filters through the barred window, its surfaces worn smooth by constant handling. For Jake, it's become a meditation object during the long, freezing nights when Gestapo interrogators demand technical knowledge that could save German installations from Allied sabotage. They offer privileges, extra food, warmer clothing, possible repatriation. But Jake's refusal earns him extended isolation and the growing realization that this tiny piece of steel represents the most complex choice he's ever faced. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. During stolen conversations at meal distributions, Jake learns that Obergefreiter Richter carries his own contradictions. The German guard's brother died in a bombing raid over Hamburg, crushed under factory rubble while working night shifts to support his family. Yet instead of hatred, Richter expresses a mechanical fascination with Allied bombing precision, particularly the timing mechanisms that allow delayed explosions. "Your people make war like clockmakers," Richter observes during one midnight exchange, his voice barely audible through the food slot. Every component calculated, every sequence planned. Jake realizes the German isn't seeking military secrets. He's trying to understand the mindset that creates such devastating efficiency. The same systematic approach that made McNiece legendary among the 506th PIR for improvising explosives from scraps and timing. The psychological pressure from Gestapo interrogators intensifies as winter tightens its grip on the camp. They arrive with detailed files about American demolition training. demanding information about improvised explosive techniques that could save German installations from Allied sabotage operations spreading across occupied Europe. The interrogation rooms smell of stale tobacco and fear, but Jake focuses on the firing pin hidden in his cell, using its familiar weight and texture to maintain mental clarity against their psychological warfare. From his fellow prisoners, Jake hears whispered rumors about the war's progress, Allied bombing raids increasing in frequency and intensity, their distant thunder reminding everyone that the conflict continues beyond the camp's walls. The bomber crews speak in hushed tones about targets they've hit, bridges destroyed, supply lines severed. Each story reinforces Jake's understanding that his specialized knowledge represents a valuable commodity both sides desperately want to control. Lieutenant Morrison, a B-17 pilot shot down over the Ruhr Valley, watches Jake during mess periods with undisguised curiosity. "Heard you're one of those crazy paratroopers," Morrison says quietly, spooning watery soup. "Filthy 13, right? We dropped supplies for you guys after Normandy." The respect in his voice carries weight among the other prisoners, but Jake notices how they still maintain distance, uncertain whether his presence makes them safer or more vulnerable. During one particularly heavy raid, a damaged Allied bomber crashes near the camp perimeter, killing its crew instantly. Jake watches from his cell window as Richter supervises the recovery of American bodies, ensuring they receive dignified treatment despite orders to simply dispose of enemy personnel. That night, Richter appears at Jake's cell with an unexpected question. If your roles were reversed, would you show such consideration for German dead? The question haunts Jake because he can't answer it honestly without confronting his own capacity for hatred and revenge. The firing pin, worn smooth from constant handling, becomes more than a mechanical focus. It's a reminder that war's moral certainties blur in unexpected ways, especially when enemies choose to acknowledge each other's humanity despite circumstances designed to destroy it. Winter's brutal grip transforms Stalag Luft 3 into a landscape of frozen mud and desperate survival. Ice forms on the inside of cell windows, and prisoners huddle together during exercise periods, their breath creating clouds that dissipate quickly in the bitter air. Jake's isolation continues, but he begins to notice Richter's quiet acts of humanity. Extra bread slipped to sick prisoners, deliberately slow responses to escape attempts, medical supplies that mysteriously appear in cells housing injured airmen. These gestures create an impossible tension for Jake, who's trained to view all Germans as enemies but can't ignore evidence of decency in unexpected places. The firing pin becomes a symbol of this contradiction, an instrument of war held by a prisoner, maintained by an enemy guard who could destroy Jake with a single report to his superiors. During long nights, Jake finds himself wondering about the mechanisms of trust and betrayal, how individual choices transcend the machinery of hatred, even in humanity's darkest chapters. Word spreads through the compound about increased Gestapo activity, interrogators pressing harder for technical information as Allied sabotage operations intensify across occupied Europe. Jake learns that other prisoners face similar pressure. Pilots questioned about navigation techniques, bombardiers pressed for targeting procedures, engineers demanded to reveal industrial vulnerabilities. The weight of specialized knowledge becomes a shared burden among men who never expected their technical skills to make them high-value prisoners. "They offered me cigarettes and warm clothes," whispers Sergeant Palmer, a radio operator from a shot-down Liberator. "Just wanted frequency schedules and code procedures. Seems harmless compared to what they're asking you." Jake recognizes the moral complexity in Palmer's voice, the temptation to trade minor secrets for basic comforts, the guilt over considering collaboration even in small ways. Lieutenant Morrison approaches Jake during one of their brief exercise periods, his pilot's instincts reading the strain in Jake's posture. "Heard they're pushing you harder than most," Morrison says, stamping his feet against the cold. "Whatever they want, it must be important. Question is whether you can hold out until liberation comes." The unspoken concern hangs between them. What if liberation doesn't come soon enough? News filters through the camp about Allied progress, rumors of successful landings in Italy, increased bombing of German industrial targets, resistance movements growing bolder across occupied territories. Each report reinforces Jake's understanding that his demolition expertise could significantly impact German defensive preparations if he broke under interrogation pressure. The firing pin becomes a talisman of resistance, proof that even the smallest component can maintain integrity under impossible stress. During one particularly brutal interrogation session, a Gestapo officer places detailed photographs of destroyed German installations on the table, bridges blown with precision timing, railways severed at critical junctions, supply depots reduced to smoking ruins. "This is your work," the officer states, though Jake knows some targets were hit by other units. "Teach us your methods, and perhaps you'll see home again." Jake's refusal earns him extended solitary confinement, but that night he finds the firing pin somehow returned to his cell, a quiet signal that Richter continues to protect him in ways that could cost the German guard his life. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The crisis arrives with February's thaw, when German authorities discover evidence of an escape tunnel and threaten to execute random prisoners unless the organizers surrender. Jake knows the tunnel's location. His demolition expert's instincts spotted the excavation during his systematic survey of the compound's structural weaknesses, but revealing it would betray fellow prisoners while staying silent might doom innocent men to death by firing squad. The tunnel runs beneath the kitchen building, expertly concealed but betrayed by subtle soil displacement that Jake's trained eye recognized weeks earlier. He'd said nothing, respecting the diggers' operational security, but now their secret threatens to become a death sentence for others. Lieutenant Morrison and several bomber crew members worked on the tunnel during night shifts, believing their technical skills might contribute to a mass escape that could embarrass German authorities and boost Allied morale. "They're serious about the executions," whispers Sergeant Palmer through the exercise yard fence. "Posted notices saying 10 men chosen by lottery if the tunnel builders don't step forward by tomorrow." Jake watches the compound's activity, noting which prisoners move with the careful tension of men carrying dangerous secrets, which guards seem genuinely troubled by the execution order and which appear eager to carry it out. That night, Richter appears at Jake's cell, holding the firing pin Jake thought he'd hidden. The German guard's expression carries unusual weight as he studies the small component. "Sometimes the most important choice is knowing when not to act," Richter says quietly, his accented English barely audible. "This war will end, and men like you will be needed to rebuild what men like us have destroyed." Jake realizes Richter has been protecting him all along, providing cover for his possession of what could be considered contraband while respecting the Americans' refusal to collaborate. The firing pin changes hands one final time as Richter returns it with a warning. "Keep your mechanical skills sharp, McNasty, but remember that the most powerful explosions sometimes come from restraint, not destruction." The moral weight of the tunnel decision presses down like the compound's oppressive atmosphere. Jake could reveal the location, saving innocent prisoners from execution while betraying the escape attempt. He could stay silent, preserving operational security while potentially watching 10 men die for something they didn't do. Or he could find a third option. Use his demolition expertise to collapse the tunnel in a way that looks accidental, destroying evidence while protecting both the diggers and their potential victims. During the night, Jake makes his choice. Using techniques learned from controlled demolitions in Normandy, he creates a small structural failure that caves in the tunnel entrance, making it appear that winter frost and thaw cycles caused the collapse. The German search teams find only filled earth and scattered debris. unable to prove intentional construction or identify the builders. The execution order is quietly rescinded, and the compound returns to its tense normalcy. But Jake carries the weight of that decision like shrapnel, the knowledge that his technical skills saved lives by destroying hope, that sometimes the most heroic act is the one that prevents action rather than enabling it. The firing pin becomes a reminder of moral complexity, proof that even in captivity, individual choices can transcend the machinery of hatred through careful restraint rather than explosive action. March 1945 brings rumors of Allied advances and German retreat, but also increased desperation among guards and interrogators facing the war's inevitable conclusion. Jake's solitary confinement continues, though Richter's subtle protections ensure he receives adequate food and medical attention, despite official pressure to break him through deprivation. The firing pin has become more than a symbol. It's a meditation object that helps Jake maintain sanity during psychological warfare designed to shatter his resistance. The secret Jake never shares, even decades later, centers on a moment of pure terror during his final Gestapo interrogation. Faced with detailed photographs of his fellow Filthy 13 members, apparently captured during other operations, Jake nearly broke, nearly traded technical knowledge for information about their fate. The interrogator's voice carried casual certainty. Your friends need medical attention that only cooperation can provide. For 30 seconds that felt like hours, Jake composed mental instructions for improvised explosives, ready to purchase his squad mates' lives with German strategic advantages. But the photographs were fakes, composite images created to exploit his loyalty to the 506th PIR's most notorious demolition team. Jake realized the deception only because one image showed Chuck Plauder wearing equipment the real Plauder would never use, a detail too subtle for intelligence officers to catch, but obvious to someone who'd shared foxholes with the man. That moment of near betrayal haunts Jake more than any combat action. The knowledge that loyalty almost made him a collaborator despite months of successful resistance. Lieutenant Morrison discovers Jake's role in the tunnel collapse through careful observation and engineering logic. Soil displacement patterns were too clean to be natural, Morrison says during a brief exercise encounter. Someone with demolition training created that collapse, probably saved a lot of lives. The pilot's voice carries no accusation, only professional recognition of expertise applied under impossible circumstances. When liberation finally comes in April 1945, Jake watches Soviet forces breach the camp perimeter with mixed emotions. Freedom tastes like dust and diesel fumes, but he can't shake the memory of Richter's final words or the weight of choices made in isolation. The German guard disappears during the chaos of liberation, leaving only the firing pin as evidence of their strange professional relationship and mutual respect, despite wearing enemy uniforms. Jake survives repatriation, medical evaluation, and return to civilian life, but carries psychological scars that never fully heal. The firing pin sits in a drawer in his post-war Oklahoma home, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest chapters, individual choices can transcend the machinery of hatred. Sometimes the most profound victories aren't explosive. They're the quiet moments when enemies choose to see each other as human beings, trapped in circumstances beyond their control. Decades later, when the MP5 submachine gun becomes the signature weapon of elite military units worldwide, Jake recognizes the elegant mechanical simplicity that makes such precision possible, the same clockwork efficiency Richter had identified in Allied operations. But he also understands that the most important mechanisms are often invisible. The internal forces that help men choose restraint over destruction, humanity over hatred, even when surrounded by war's machinery of dehumanization. The Oklahoma morning sun streams through Jake McNiece's workshop window as he holds the firing pin one last time before placing it in a small wooden box alongside his other war mementos. It's 1987, and his granddaughter Sarah has asked him to share stories for a high school history project about World War II veterans. Most tales come easily. Normandy jumps, the Filthy 13's notorious reputation, even combat demolitions that earned him decorations and legend status among airborne units. But the Stalag Luft 3 story remains locked away, too complex for simple heroic narratives. How do you explain that some of the war's most important moments involved choosing not to act? That an enemy guard's quiet humanity mattered more than dramatic escape attempts? That sometimes survival depended on recognizing shared humanity across battle lines that were supposed to make such recognition impossible? Grandpa Jake, were you really as crazy as the books say? Sarah asks, examining faded photographs of the 506th PIR. My teacher says the Filthy 13 were like characters from a movie. Jake studies his granddaughter's earnest face and realizes how completely the legend has overtaken the lived experience. How McNasty, the explosive-wielding rebel, has replaced Jake, the frightened young man who spent months learning that courage sometimes means not using the skills that made you famous. The firing pin tells a different story than citation paperwork or unit histories. It speaks to the psychological weight of specialized knowledge, the moral complexity of loyalty under pressure, and the strange truth that enemies can show more humanity than circumstances should allow. Jake has never told anyone about Richter's protections or the tunnel collapse decision, details that would complicate heroic narratives people prefer to hear about the good war and clear moral choices. But watching Sarah examine the small component with growing curiosity, Jake recognizes something familiar in her engineer's instincts, the same systematic approach that made him valuable to both the 101st Airborne and German intelligence officers desperate to understand Allied demolition techniques. Every piece has a purpose, he tells her, closing the wooden box carefully. Sometimes the most important purpose is just being there when someone needs to remember what they're fighting for. The workshop falls quiet, except for the distant rumble of a freight train crossing the steel bridge outside town. For just a moment, the sound brings back memories of Stalag Luft 3's bitter cold, Richter's accented English, and the weight of choosing restraint over action when lives hung in the balance. Jake understands now what the German Guard meant about rebuilding what war had destroyed. It wasn't just about physical reconstruction, but about maintaining the human connections that survive even when politics and nations tear apart. The firing pin remains in its box, a small component that once symbolized the elegant machinery of destruction, but came to represent something more complex. Proof that individual choices matter even in war's largest mechanisms, that enemy lines can't always prevent recognition of shared humanity, and that sometimes the most heroic acts are the ones that prevent destruction rather than creating it. These are lessons too nuanced for history books or family legends, but essential for understanding that behind every medal and mission report, there's a human being carrying memories the world will never fully see. If this story reminded you that behind every medal and mission report, there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.